Now, what is this debate about? This debate naming itself decolonizing our thinking. To understand that, I want to summarize what my overall finding is. It is this. As I said, these countries have become members of the big, if you want to say it, big world ruled by capitalism, politically managed and organized by nation states, the rivalries among the nation states, and their economic rationale, which is aiming at the growth of money. There is, however, one remarkable difference between the old colonizers and this part of the world in which this and about which this discussion is going on. And this remarkable difference is this one. While the countries, the nation states in the West, or to use a category of this debate, post-colonial discussion, the North, they call it. While the countries in the global North offer the members of their societies, their citizen societies, to pursue their materialism as long as they pursue this within the politically framed conditions to achieve their aims, and by doing that to make sure that the pursuing the private individual materialism of the citizens is a contribution to the growth of capital. This, what I call conceded materialism. This conceded materialism does widely not exist, at least not as a general basis of the living conditions of the people in this former colonized world. The world they themselves call the global South. It doesn't exist there because there is not the wealth, there is not the economy for which these people could work, for which they could offer their services. There is not the economic foundation for offering to these people this kind of what I call the conceded materialism. What has this got to do with this debate? This is the explanation of what this debate is all about. Why? The debate about this world, this post-colonialism called, the debate is the debate among disappointed citizens who are disappointed about the fact that their promises, their dreams, that with the implementation, with the transformation of their societies into these market economies and nation states, into nation states which were no longer under the exclusive grip of a colonizer, that this shift would improve their living conditions, would allow them to at least also pursue their material interests. This is not only the case. In most parts of the world, one can even say there are a few exceptions, but I don't want to go now, travel through the world and go from country to country. Substantially, the living conditions of these people have become worse. And this has something to do with the fact that they have become independent states, which means they are no longer the subject or object of the exclusive exploitation of the people and their natural resources by one country, the colonizer, but they are now the resource for the exploitation of the people and their resources by the whole world of capitalists, namely those who rule this world, the imperialists of the so-called West. And this debate is a discussion about this situation. It articulates the frustration, the disappointments, the critique of citizens from this part of the world, disappointed about their expectations that changing their societies towards an independent, their own state, which rules their country, would substantially change their living conditions. As I said, this is not only not the case, rather the opposite is the case. Now, how this general position, what I want to say is this discussion all about, and how this discussion is carried out, and how it is phrasing this frustration, this disappointment about the non-realized expectations in the creation of independent states. Before I discuss this, I want to make another remark about this discussion. So, a few things. Firstly, this debate, titled Decolonizing Thinking or Post-Colonialism, about post-colonialism, this is a debate that is a debate among critical people. They are people who consider themselves as a continuation of critiques of capitalism. They believe that their critique is a further development of capitalism criticism. It is a debate which indicates via its title under which is carried out, again, decolonization, it indicates with this title dealing with coloniality. It is a debate that is a very political debate. It is a political debate dealing with the political status of the citizens in this part of the world, in the former colonized world, in the new independent, in the world with the new independent states. And this is a debate carried out among intellectuals, academics, but also carried out with substantially the same contents among political activists. So it is a very important debate. It's important in the sense of it's about a topic which covers the reflections about what is going on in a major part of this world. And one has to say, of course, that this debate is directed, addressed from this part of the world towards the imperial part of the world. So what they criticize mainly is, and this is also remarkable to say, they criticize with their notion of decolonization the existing, how do you say, Western capitalist world, accusing them of a continuation of a colonial mindset. That's why they argue they want to decolonize this Western part of the world. So the discussions are heavily going on, especially in countries like the UK, especially in the UK, but also in the United States, in which people attack a continuation of colonial thinking, therefore calling it decolonizing thinking. Now I have to say quickly one thing about the situation in Germany. In Germany, this debate, which is again a debate about a major part of the world, and it is a debate also directed towards the Western world, opposing this Western world with this critique. In Germany, this debate hardly takes place, at least compared to how heavily it's discussed in other parts of the world. It is almost not existing. And the question is, why is that? The answer on this question you can find in the position of somebody who has exactly this critique, saying, why does this debate not happen in Germany? And the answer on his answer on this question and his arguments to try to persuade German intellectuals, German critical thinkers, that they should participate in this debate under the notion of decoloniality. His argument is telling. What is this guy saying? His name is Zimmer. I think he's a professor at University of Hamburg or anything, but that's not important. What is he saying? He is arguing in that way. He says, the creation of a German national identity is missing an important opportunity to further develop the German national identity with an element that comes or could come, because that is his critique, that it doesn't happen, this debate, could come and could make a contribution to the creation of a wider concept of a German national identity. Why is it his argument? Don't we use the colonial history Germany has? Why is Germany not using this in order to widen the concept of what the German national identity is? And from this it is clear, if you discuss the concerns, the political concerns, the questions of a multiplicity of national identities about which this debate is, and if you say you want to discuss this in order to functionalize this, to make it useful for the creation of the German identity, well, then this debate doesn't take place, because it's all directed towards German nationalism. Now, my next point is, I want to just quickly give an overview over the topics which, to my mind, cover the whole range of this discussion, which is carried out, or reflections which are carried out under this title, decolonial thinking. And these topics are the following ones. Topic number 1, I title Reflections about Political Identities. I come back to this point. I'm just enumerating now the headlines of the things I would briefly talk about. Then the second one is called, the key word there is indigenization. Indigenization of thinking, indigenization of thought, of theories. Number 3 is called, the buzzword is Eurocentrism. So that means that is the critique with which this decolonial thinking opposes the way of thinking, the theories created in the tradition of the European social sciences. And if I say in the tradition of the European social sciences, this implies that this includes, of course, the whole West. That means also the discussions in the United States. Eurocentrism is the title of this discussion, via which they oppose social thought in Europe. That's number 3. Number 4 is briefly about the epistemologies. That means the way of theorizing decolonial thinking has constructed as a way how one should think about the world. That's number 4. Number 5, I want to summarize a little bit what the theoretical achievements of these discussions are, and also a little bit mention what kind of political implications that has. These achievements, decolonial thinking is gaining, and they do gain it. Finally, I want to make some brief comments about the contributions in this coming from the historical materialism. And I also want to make a kind of briefly comments about which thinkers in which part of the world argued and motivated by this decolonial thinking, which thinkers have to change which thought, forced, in quotation marks, to change their thought by adjusting thinking to what decolonial thinking advocates should be scientific thinking, or any thinking. That's my last point. Now, my first point, as I said, is the discussions about political identities. I have to say here just a quick methodological remark, right? I cannot, of course, not discuss all the details of this discussion, all these discussions, all these 5 points. That's too much. This is only trying to give an overview, trying to touch on the key points I'm reflecting on there and I'm criticizing there. So I cannot do more than really giving some very brief, if you want, also rough overviews what this debate is about and what my view on that is. So let's start with this first point. This first point is about political identities. As I said, decolonizing is a very political debate, and the debate is in fact about, let's call it, the inequalities of the recognition of the different political identities over the world. It is arguing about a prioritization of the citizens representing with their nationality the imperial states, which are not in this terminology called imperial states, but which are called states in which colonial thinking still exists, and the fact that, as it is discussed there, that the complaint that citizens are privileged, which come from these countries, is for these thinkers a sign caused by a continuation of a colonial way of thinking. This is quite interesting, one should note. Describing, analyzing, theorizing about the different positions, the different ways the citizens in this world, compared between the former colonial world, the new independent states, and the old colonialists. The way this is described as a continuation of colonial thinking, the privileges the people from the old colonial part of the world have had and still have, and have despite, as they would say, of the fact that other countries also have now become nation states and citizen societies. And considering this again as being a sign of a continuation of colonialism is remarkable, because this already says this doesn't suit into equal nation states, as they would say. There are all nation states, and because there are all nation states, all the citizens in these countries, in all these national societies, deserve the equal acceptance over the world. And the fact that this is not happening has, according to these people, nothing to do with capitalism. No, if they say this is because of the continuation of colonialism, they even say it contradicts the ideas of nation states, that if the citizens are treating unequally. So it is a way to criticize these states via accusing them of having still the elements of colonialism in them. It criticizes them and tells them that the differences, making differences between the status of citizens from these parts of the world, is a violation of what nation states should be equally. Citizens with equally acknowledged political identities. Secondly, these debates reflecting on the privileges of the privileges of politically different citizens, different citizens from different countries in the world, is arguing with what a main author of this debate, Spivak is her name, calls a strategic essentialism. The content of the strategic essentialism, which means this is how to perform, how to execute the opposition against this still colonized way of thinking, the opposition against this still existing colonialism in the minds of people. This is what she calls the strategic essentialism, and the means of this strategic essentialism, Spivak discusses, are variations of nationalism. They are, in the first place, reflections about racism. They are reflections about ethnicity and nationalism. And these reflections about racism are worth to think about it for a second. Racism, I don't want to discuss that notion here because, I have no time for that. But one thing everybody knows, racism is a creature of colonialism. The decolonial critique, the discussion arguing for decolonization has a very ambiguous view about racism. On one hand, they know as well that racism is a construct originating from colonialism. But as an element of their strategic essentialism, opposing this inequality of citizens in different parts of the world, racism is made a positive way of opposing the still existing colonialism. It's confusing, no? How does that work? Is it not the case that racism, more than any other category, because the other category, like ethnicism and nationalism, they in fact were generated during the time when in those countries which were not colonized, and further developed after the World War II, and so on. But I don't want to go in details here. The only thing I want to say is colonialism and ethnicism, they are categories which sort of were created later. But one thing is for sure, racism is the category characterizing the colonized people. Now then, these people say, these decolonial thinkers, what they say is this. They say, a way to oppose the continuation of colonial thinking is to stick positively, to insist on your race, that is, to insist against the continuation of colonialism on a category which is nothing else but the creature of colonialism. That should be all about this topic, because I cannot elaborate on that. I'm elaborating on that in my book and in other videos where I make individual presentations about all these 5 topics here. Now let's go to the point number 2. That is indigenization. What is that? Indigenization is the exercise to somehow artificially construct national identities. I'm saying it's artificially constructing national identities because these countries, they didn't have this kind of identification of its citizens with its nation state because they didn't have a nation state. And as everybody knows, the social structure of these countries was not constructed via the citizenship of people, because there were no nation states. So there are other social categories ruling these countries, like, everybody knows this, like tribes and so on. And now, what is this indigenization about? The indigenization is an attempt to try to establish these new nation states arising from former colonized society, try to create national identities for them. That means ways to see their societies, their countries, which allow them to become positive citizens of their countries. To say, I am a Nigerian, or I'm whatever, right? I identify myself with this country and its political body. I consider this political body as a subject that is useful for me, that is serving me. Again, I cannot go into details here, but I should just say two things. Firstly, creating national identities is a big topic of discussions in this decolonial thinking, and it has a little bit a kind of irony. You could also say it's a little bit a kind of strange drama, because this debate is all about trying to find a way to think about their countries which is different from other countries, which is only the way you think about this country, which is an exclusive identity of somebody who says, this is my country. Morocco, I don't know, whatever. And now the effort to create such national identities, to create these identities with the demarcations from other identities, the distinction is the important thing. It's not that one, it's this one. That's what the nature of identity means. This activity follows a procedure which is, ironically, but not coincidentally, everywhere exactly the same. And why is it everywhere exactly the same? Because the challenge they have is everywhere the same. Firstly, the political body with which and for which they want to create social thought, allowing the citizens to identify them with the state, the political body is everywhere the same. The construct is exactly the same everywhere around the world. So there is a kind of procedure, step by step, what you have to do, and a discussion among these people discussing and reflecting on this indigenization, which ironically, while aiming at identities with the demarcations from other identities, they all create the same. The second point is, as I already said, the other challenge is that since these societies cannot persuade, I say carefully, I'm saying that carefully because it's not a persuasion, it is after all the political power who persuades them. But let's not discuss this here. This goes into the history of how these national identities have been created in those countries which do have a national identities. The former, the colonizing world, the Western world. They created this during the history of the creation of their nation state. I don't want to discuss this here. But these countries, they have a problem. And they have a problem, and that is that they have to try to motivate their citizens to consider their nation states as an instrument for pursuing their material life aims, without being able to offer them to pursue their life aims. So they don't have what I called before that conceded materialism. The conceded materialism that is used by the nation states in the Western world to persuade people that the state is nothing doing but helping them to pursue their material interests. This is how nation states present themselves in these parts of the world. But nation states in that part of the world, presenting themselves as instruments for the people pursuing their personal interests, is, let me say, quite impossible, because they don't have to offer such thing. And that is what these discussions about indigenization don't know, don't realize. But that is what they are confronted with, and the more they realize that this somehow does not really work, they don't know why, the more they try. And the more they try actually to move beyond all kind of, elements for the identification of people with their nation states. I don't want to go into details because that is then the discussion about what this story of indigenization is. Now, that was number 2. Indigenization. I come to number 3. Number 3 is the critique coined Eurocentrism. What is that? Eurocentrism is what these decolonial thinkers accuse the thinkers in the Western world of creating theories they oppose. They say they are not good, they are bad, we are against them, we criticize them. How? One has to just have a look at this name of this critique called Eurocentrism. And thinking a little about it before, you don't have to even read all these books about Eurocentrism. Of course, it's good and one should do it. But already that concept, the title they gave their critique, calling it Eurocentrism, is quite telling. The object of the critique are the European social sciences, theories created by these European social sciences. And what is the critique? Euro, that's what they critique. And what is the critique? Centrism. So what does that mean? That means we do not have a critique of what you are saying as long as you say that about Europe. You may say that. Accusing you to be Eurocentric means you consider what you say about Europe as being also a valid thought, valid theories beyond Europe. Now that's interesting. If one looks at the theories created in Europe, especially theories which are somehow thinking about this part of the colonial world, but already if one only think about these European social sciences, European thought, it is very obvious, at least for somebody who looks at what these sciences are saying, these sciences in fact consider the European societies as an achievement, as they phrase it, of civilization. Europe and its societies represent the progress of civilization. And accordingly, the societies beyond Europe, the colonial world, colonized world, they are, in the best case, on their way towards civilization. As everybody knows, there is in this concert of disciplinary social sciences a discipline called anthropology. And anthropology has been created for reflecting about nothing else but about the non-European world, originally, at least. And their reflections, if you read all these famous anthropologists, their reflections say this: the non-European world is not yet so far, but it's on its way towards what Europeans are. They are in the process of becoming civilized. That is what these European sciences say and what they think, how they create their theories about themselves and about what they call the rest of the world. This is not criticized by the idea of arguing against a Eurocentrism. Not at all. What they argue against is, you may have your theories in Europe and about Europe, and we even say they are certainly meaningful for Europe and the European societies. So they even say, with this notion of Eurocentrism, they are valid theories about the European societies. But one thing is we cannot accept, that's why they say it's Eurocentrism. There must be a multiplicity of such kind of views looking at societies through the biased view of how these societies see them. This kind of biased view should not be the exclusive right of the European social sciences, but there should be a multiplicity of thinking, of theories, a multiplicity consisting of thought which is created through the lenses of the national identity of other countries in the world. Others should also have the permission, should be accepted as creating their own views about themselves and about anything else. In other words, theories which are representing the representation of a political entity are not rejected as being theories which are just transporting political views. No, the opposite is the case in this critique. It says theories which are transporting a political view about political entities, a self-perception of how you see yourself and how you represent yourself towards the world. This should not be the privilege of the European social sciences, but should also be allowed for the other political bodies, the other countries, the other part of the world, as they would say, also for the global south. I don't want to say something about this category, it's bizarre. Now this is all I want to say about Eurocentrism. There are many more things to be said, but I just want to touch on these points, saying that this Eurocentrism has a very critical image, but it is everything else but criticizing the European social sciences. It's the opposite of that. It's saying it's okay as long as you stay with your theories in Europe and don't travel with your theories in other parts of the world and say these theories are also valid there. By the way, this accusing these theories to travel around the world and to be valid anywhere in the world is made up by this discussion. But I don't want to go into details with that because there is also some truth in that, but it's basically made up. I cannot discuss that here. So that was Eurocentrism. Now, the third point is, where is it? Okay. The fourth point. 3 was Eurocentrism. Now the fourth point is the epistemologies of decolonizing or decolonized thinking. Decolonized thinking has in fact created and suggests and argues for a new way of theorizing. A way of theorizing that, unlike that Eurocentrism, is not considering, as they would say, any theory as a universally valid theory. In this notion, again, I can only touch on that, in this notion, a universally valid theory, in this notion, or this notion consists of an attack on objective knowledge. Because, of course, nobody would say, my theory about any phenomenon which exists here is also valid about other places in the world in which that phenomena doesn't exist at all. But of course, if the same phenomena exists somewhere else, and if somebody would say, this has nothing to do with the same topic which is also existing somewhere else, that's also bizarre. The example, this famous Chakrabarti, who is the top guy developing this decolonial thinking epistemologies, in fact argues that you cannot talk about elections. That's the example, or one of the examples he gives. He says you cannot talk about elections abstracting from the different way they are seen in Australia and in India, is his example. So you have to have a different theory about elections, because elections in Australia and in India are seen in a different way. And this is his example by which he introduces, as he calls it, a way of thinking that gains its thought through the place, it's called, where thinking takes place or where thinking is about. The place in these epistemological reflections about how thinking must work, the place is the cute, innocent name for the nation state. Which means that what he advocates is that theories which claim any sort of truth, objectivity, are a wrong, a critical way of theorizing. So, in other words, decolonial thinking is not only about this and that theory. The critique of Eurocentrism is not only about this and that theory. It is a way of thinking. It is a new way of thinking. And the new way of thinking is a thinking that advocates the location as the source of thought. What you think gets into your mind via the location, from the location, and your mind is an articulation of what the location, which is the nation state, tells you. That is what thought is about, necessarily about, and only possible about, and everybody who says something else is wrong. That is their point. Now, this is obviously a really monstrous determinism. The location tells you what you think, and this, of course, the location tells you what you think as an epistemological argument applies to the whole world, right? The location is everywhere the resource of thinking. So this is a very universal theory, denying that any universal thought could be made, but this is an exception. The epistemological reflections are an exception. Any thought must be created by the location, except this epistemological must. Now one can imagine this means nothing else but introducing the raison d'être ruling the mind of national societies. Political thought, which is the thought that is considered as the way of thinking of a national society. This is the thought, the raison d'être of a national society that constitutes theories about the world. It is not very difficult to conclude from there that this is the end of any discourses. If thought is the articulation of what the nation state, the national society, imposes, or how do you say that, feeds into your mind, then there is a multiplicity of such national views, and there is no way anymore to argue, to discuss about anything, or to put it in other words, this epistemology for this critical thinking, coining itself as decolonial thinking, detecting everywhere remains of colonialism. This epistemology is anti-criticism. And it is not only that. I come back to that point in my summary, to which I come now. What are the achievements, the progress, if you want to call it, from the point of view of those who successfully introduced decolonial thinking, both as a way of theorizing, as a method to create thought, but also what is an achievement in terms of what this means for the scientific knowledge in general? Firstly, this decolonial thinking is the progress from a criticizing colonialism as a particular activity of capitalism, more precisely as the activity founding with the wealth of the colonies, the big players of capitalism. This critique, with its notion of colonialism that still causes all the phenomena they describe, and all the phenomena they describe as the disappointment about the fact that the ideal they had about the nation state didn't show up, its results. This is the critique that considers itself as a further development of the critique of capitalism. It is a debate that with its radicalization of the subjectivism consisting of political views imprinted into humans' thinkers' brain via the location, as they phrase it. It is the progress of decolonial thinking to go behind, to abolish the achievements. The social sciences, in that sense at least, represent that they were a way of thinking that emancipated human thinking from the rule of religion. It is a way of thinking that consists of the celebration of nationalism and the celebration of all sorts of irrationalisms. I mentioned race as an element, as a cognitive element, as a cognitive resource of scientific thinking. An example: these people, decolonial critique people, they argue like this. They say, it's obvious, we can find that in the sciences in the European sciences, you can find all kind of very Christian ideas. That's correct. That's true. So what is their consequence? They say, if the European sciences construct their theories via images about humans which originate from Christianity, then this is not something we reject, but this is something we reject as the only way to create such theories. So we want to create theories which originate from the image of humans, from the beliefs, from the ideas of, let's call it just the Islam. So it is the re-entering of religion as a main resource of thinking. I want to finish my talk with 2 points. Firstly, it is obvious all these people I mentioned, these decolonial thinkers, especially their big thinkers, Spivak, Said, and so on, Chakrabarti, they were all former Marxists. More precisely, they were all educated people, educated with the historical materialism. And it is quite obvious in the way they construct their thought, last but not least also their epistemologies, with its, as I called it, monstrous determinism, how this thinking has been promoted by the historical materialism. Somehow it's a further development of historical materialism. Just to say 2 examples. This notion, epistemological notion, the location is the resource of thinking, is very obviously an application of the notion from Marx, or at least, to be more precise, the interpretation of the notion of Marx through the historical materialism. Being decides about thinking or thought. That's what they apply and say exactly. Being creates thought is not a critique of the thought, which just mirror what the reality tells them to think. No, they think this is a positive way of theorizing and say, then let's choose the location, the place, as the reality that creates thought. And by choosing the place to create thought, we arrive at where we want to arrive, at the multiplicity of nationalist views, the multiplicity of the different raison d'etre of all the states of the world presenting their political worldviews as scientific insights. That's the methodological aspect. This being decides about thinking. The other one is also obvious. All these thoughts are based, as one can see, with these political discussions, they are all revolving around the nation state. And as I said at the very beginning, the whole basis, the whole substance of this is to reflect on the results of the idea creating these independent nation states and the frustration that it didn't happen, and then accusing a not really realized independency, a not really acknowledged citizenship, politically defined citizenship, as the reason for the frustrations, for the not existing material improvements they rightly notice. That is all about the state, the concept of the state. And what has it got to do with histomat? It has got to do this. The histomat, as you know, made a kind of journey. The journey was this. It started from the notion of the nation state as the political body oppressing the workers, and it resulted in the notion of the workers and peasant state as the one and only real revolutionary subject. So it is this idea of the histomat presenting the nation state as the means of the poor that we can see here giving birth, as the thought giving birth, to introduce the nation state as the real resource of thinking. A quick final remark. It is obvious if you say that there is still colonialism in this world, that you find capitalism, of course not perfect, but capitalism is an achievement, because everything you have to complain about that you face within capitalism is, as they say, a continuation of still colonial thinking, not of capitalist thinking. It's not the rationality of capitalism that is creating these differences between the citizens. It is the rationality of colonialism that creates that. So it is inevitable that all these people who were all Marxists, who were all these people who were advocating the fight against the colonialists as a fight against capitalism, it is inevitable that all these people had to revise their view to be people who were somehow sharing the critique, the Marx, or the critique of the historical materialism. And of course, that's all, after all, going back to this guy Marx. So they feel obliged to say something why they think Marx is out. And I want to say something quickly about how they do that. I don't want to go into much details here. Briefly, Marx has created a notion looking at the societies in Asia, and because and he calls it, I don't know quite precisely how he translates that into English, it's kind of the Asian production mode or anything like that. And that this is about the way that in the sphere of agriculture they work a lot with the water when they produce rice and so on. Marx called that Asian production mode. Now, this is how they find that Marx could be disproved. How does it work? They say, we found that there is also that kind of production mode, the same as in Asia, in Australia. Finding this, we can prove that you can see that Marx generalized his production mode, he called Asian production mode, with that adjective Asian, and didn't notice that there were other parts in the world which were doing the same. In other words, Marx did a generalization. He made any universal knowledge about anything, and he could somehow be discovered as being a Eurocentric thinker, getting his ideas from the European societies and applying that to the world, because he didn't notice that this Asian production mode also consists in Australia. In other words, what are they telling about Marx? They say, you, Marx, created a theory about capitalism. And since you assume, you claim that this is a theory about capitalism everywhere, you fail to fulfill the way of theorizing decolonial thinking suggests as the only way of thinking. You didn't look at the location, Australia. You didn't apply decolonial thinking, which is very amazing, no? Because this was done something like, 200 years later, 150 years later, I don't know precisely. So this is the bit kind of funny, you could also say shabby way of disproving Marx's theory about capitalism by saying that capitalism is different here and there. And because it's different here and there, your whole theory about what capitalism, the nature of capitalism is disproved. You didn't think through the place. Your mind was not fed with what you heard from what the political view in the countries is about which you were thinking. You thought about capitalism in general, and since you did that, the theory about Marx was disproved. Marx's critique of capitalism is not a local theory. Really? That's all. Thank you.